So if I ask the question of this audience, how many of you are change makers in your community, I bet I'd see a lot of hands go up. And if I also asked, how many feel that as a change maker, you're completely crushing it in terms of getting everything done that you want to get done? Maybe not so many hands. You see, what's interesting about changing something in your community is that it's at a whole new complex level. If you think about your life and your business life, you know, you've got lots of examples to turn to. You've got people to ask, probably got books to read if you wanted to, in terms of how to create change. But when it comes to creating change in your community, it's something most of us do so rarely that we're kind of like babes in the woods. We're stumbling along, doing the best we can, and bringing a whole bunch of people together. And the thing is, it's highly, highly important. In fact, there's a movement around the world for more and more citizens to get involved in change-making when it comes to community. So over the last couple of years, I've had a chance to not only lean into lots of change-making projects, but I've also, because I'm a systems thinker, I've been trying to figure out what works and what doesn't when it comes to community change. And so what I'd like to do is share a few of those tips with you, so as all of you being change makers, you can be as most effective as possible. So I'm going to rewind, and this, ironically, I actually saw this on my Facebook feed today. 4 years ago to this very day, I was driving towards a village in the middle of Uganda in the jungle with a bunch of friends on a social impact trip. And what was interesting is going to Africa was always something I wanted to do as a kid. It was on my bucket list. And probably like many of you, if you've had a similar bucket list idea, it's like, how can I help? How can I impact that country or the people that I meet in terms of helping them? And what's interesting is that being in Uganda had a big impact on me. In fact, it reminded me of a couple of things that often as Westerners, we forget. The first one is community and the power of community. You see, what's happened over the last, say, I don't know, 50 years, we've all become really, really loving independence. You know, we live in suburbs and we don't necessarily know everyone in our street. We live in apartment buildings, we don't necessarily know anyone in our building. We love the fact that nobody knows what we're doing. But there's a problem with that too. No one also knows the struggles we're dealing with. We don't know what each one has in terms of assets or skills that we could work together with. And that's the one thing I saw when I was in Uganda, was everyone in the community would band together and try to solve problems. And that's really the second thing I noticed. A lot of us in North America have, in many ways, outsourced community change to government. Oh, needs to change? That's government's problem. And here's what's interesting. In Uganda and in many third world countries, they don't have that option. Often they're dealing with government corruption. Or they're dealing with the fact that, you know, way out in the middle of the jungle, it's out of sight, out of mind. So if you want to get anything done, you got to do it yourself. And often, there isn't even any social safety net for them. So if it's a problem that's critical, let's say an economic problem, or jobs, or how are we going to get fed, it's up to you. This has also kind of softened us over time, because we feel that there's not a lot of risk. Now I want to fast forward about 3 months. Remember, this trip had a big impact on me, but I didn't really quite know what. I was still marinating in this. And I want to take you now to an awards show. And this was for technology companies. I happened to work in technology startups most of my career, and we were up for an award. And I was the one that they asked, if we happened to win, could you go up and give the thank you speech? And as I sat back and I listened to the other thank you speeches from the other folks that won, there was a theme that was starting to be created. And the theme was, how do we get more kids to choose to go into computer science and engineering, because we just don't have enough people to fill the roles. And what was interesting is that story didn't necessarily relate to me. The one that related to me was the fact that when I was in grade 8, lo and behold, our school somehow got a set of computers. And I discovered, actually through a friend of mine, Rob, that you could be amazingly creative and you could be a problem solver using computers. Originally, when we were first using them, we were just using for math equations, and I thought it was just a big, dumb calculator, to be honest with you. But it was amazing to see this, and this really affected me because I spent the rest of my career in technology companies. And if it hadn't been for that instance, I may not have done that. So I really believe that we need to get coding back into the classroom, but back into the middle school grades, at least, maybe earlier. So I vowed, if I get up, if we win the prize, it was a 1 in 3 shot. This is how destiny somehow works sometimes, that I would say that story. And we won. And I got up, and I told this story. But that's not the most impactful thing in terms of change for me, at least, as a change maker. It was when I did something, and I did it impromptu, and I didn't even realize what I did until I had done it. And that is, I told the story, and right in front of me was the premier of our province at the time. And I said, I have an opportunity. I want to challenge the premier. And so I did. I said, Mr. Premier, I'd like to see how we can get coding back into the classroom. And this is the tricky part. This is the part that really changed me. I symbolically raised my hand and I said, and let me be the first to try to figure that out. The power of doing that was I committed in front of 450 of my friends and the premier. If you want to be committed to a project in community change, good place to do it. But the second thing that was really interesting was when you put it out there that you want to solve something and you volunteer and you want to collaborate, you attract others to that, others that are hiding in the woodwork. And boy, did that ever happen. Over the next couple of days, emails, phone calls, tweets, Facebook messages, everyone saying, how can we get involved? How can we help? And so, we were on a mission. Lo and behold, a movement was beginning. And in order to feed that movement, we decided to do something collectively that I had seen another friend do through a project that he had done to help a group of New Brunswickers bring an amazing music program called Sistema from Venezuela and transplant it here. And this was using a documentary called Sistema Revolution. And it was like, could we do the same thing? So without giving away too many of the secrets of that documentary, let me explain the documentary we did called Code Kids. We started off, a bunch of us chipped in, and eventually a national broadcaster even came on board to help amplify it. And here's what was interesting. We decided to shoot the documentary towards a successful ending. The ending was coding back into the school system. And here's what's interesting when you do that. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you create a movement towards something that's positive, you're creating a vision. And here's another thing that's interesting. When you do that, like in any story, everyone wants to be the hero. Nobody wants to be the villain. Who would stop that? And that's what would happen. People would come and say, how can we help? And they would be part of the interview, and they'd all want to be part of it. It literally was a magical thing happening. One of the other things we decided to do, which was based on that other documentary, was let's go to where the best practices for coding in school are. And that just happened to be in Estonia, in Finland. And when we were there, we discovered another key thing that when you're a change maker, and that is, often you go in with an assumption, we know how to change this. And we often thought, well, we thought, a whole bunch of us at that point in time was, if you wanted to change the school system to teach more coding, you'd start at the top. You'd change it, and then it would go down. But in Estonia, it was the opposite. It started at the bottom as a grassroots movement. It was also a foundation outside of government. And what they do is they'd work with teachers as a way to find other change makers in the school system to back them to help make the change and then grow it and grow it and grow it. That model became exactly the same model that we used here. When we came back, that very same premier, less than 1 year later, and by the way, even before the documentary had even aired, was announcing funding for an organization called Brilliant Labs. And Brilliant Labs would do very much the same thing, helping schools employ coding, maker spaces, maker projects, to really help STEM take root in school. And it's still an ongoing project. It's still growing now. And in fact, it's continued to grow not only in New Brunswick, but it also grew into Nova Scotia as well, the neighboring province. The interesting thing that this whole process did was it got me very, very interested in how government worked. Now I want you to fast forward all the way to today. When I was introduced, one of the titles that I have is actually a volunteer role. I'm an entrepreneur in residence in the government. And people ask me, are you crazy? Aren't you frustrated? You're an entrepreneur. You're used to working in a fast pace. You're used to agility, getting change men, taking risks. And you're inside of government? That's not known for that. But here's what's interesting. As change makers, we often make the mistake of transposing one system, the way we think one system works, on another system. We make that assumption and we don't test it. And that can be dangerous. But it also can lead to a lot of frustration. So I've spent the last couple years since Brilliant Labs was announced, getting to know and understand government. And by doing that, I've discovered there's amazing people that really care. There's a lot of people that want change just as much as we do. And it just means they need to be shown the way or given a shot or to partner with others. And because of that, I've been able to level set and say, you know what? Here are my expectations on this system. And you know, every day, every time I meet someone, I'm always amazed. This is so awesome. These people really want to change. And every time I do this, I have a great day. That's part of it. The other thing I noticed too is government doesn't have an R&D department. Think about it. We ask them to be super efficient. We want them to spend money, but it's typically in delivering services. And you know, it's typically delivering services in the same way they've always delivered because they have no money and they have no department to focus on coming up with new ways. I want you to think of something. This is another thing that I want you to think about, and this is a misconception. Often, when we have a new idea or we're frustrated, we say, oh, we've got the solution. The first thing we want to do is we want to go to our politician and say, here's the idea, go fix it. Well, with no R&D department, and frankly, with an organization that generally is pretty big and pretty risk adverse, much like any other massive entity, company is included, it's not going to go very far. It's kind of the equivalent of, imagine if you had an idea and you went to a company that would typically create that product and you said, here's my awesome idea to the CEO. Now, write me a big check. It wouldn't happen. We'd all love it to, but it wouldn't. So why would we expect to do the same thing? The way change happens in the private sector is typically big companies don't do the innovation. It's smaller companies, it's startups. It's people like you and I that start with an idea, gather others around, start to create momentum, start to create a way to solve that problem, tweak it, test it, scale it up. And when it gets to a certain point, it might get acquired by a larger company. And that's how they acquire innovation. The same thing can happen with us. It starts with us as citizens. We band together, we be scrappy, we find our own resources, and when we have a chance to finally, and we've proven it in, it de-risks it. It makes it easy for the civil service, for the government, to acquire that. It only makes sense. It's the way it works everywhere else. A couple of quick points I want to leave with you, kind of in general. You're probably asking, well, how do we kind of dive in as community change makers? Well, I've got this philosophy, and it is do one thing. Every day, pick something, whether it's writing an email, having a meeting, a coffee, trying something, researching, make a phone call. Thing is, look at it almost like a football analogy. If every day you gain a yard, and occasionally, if you go for something, and it's one of those like, I'm going to try to see if I can get this meeting with so-and-so, and you get it, that's like a 10-yard pass. You look back after a year, and you might have actually scored a lot of touchdowns. You actually might have won some games. And who knows, maybe you'll win the Super Bowl as more and more people join with you. The idea is it's one bite at a time. Another thing I want to leave with you, and these are probably the most key things. I've already mentioned this, but I want to leave with on these two last points. Often, we find ourselves and we find others talking about problems or solutions, and we hear the words they, the government, he, she, when describing a problem. What we're really doing is we're saying, that's a problem, and I don't own it. That's their problem. I encourage you to use the word I. I own a piece of the problem. And if you want to use we, please don't use the royal we, which is, we will do this, but no one really takes ownership. It sounds good. You want to use the collective we. All these I's that are willing to step up and take action. And then when you do that, please remember, try to avoid using discounted words. What are discounted words? I'd like to do this someday. Or, this would be great, I think. These are all words that allow you a quick escape. What I encourage you to use is one of the most powerful words that you can think of to use. I will. I will do this. I will, or we will, the collective we, will do this. Two things happen. It commits you, and it's one of the most attractive words for finding others that want to join you in creating positive change in your community. Thank you.